Well, welcome everybody. This is Modernity and its Discontents. So thank you all for being here, whether you signed up or whether you're just sitting in which case you're very welcome, or if you're considering whether you're going to join, then you're also welcome. So in this course we're looking at modern art, and we're looking at modern art primarily in the period between the two world wars. Today I'm just going to give an introduction about the course, talk a bit about the rationale of the course and the assessment and so forth. And then in the second part I'll show you some images, and we'll talk a little bit about the background to this course. We'll look at some works of art from the period a bit before this course to give you a background, and we'll just see some little a few examples of the works that we'll be looking at on this course, like a kind of trailer for you to evaluate it. So I'll start off by giving you a bit of a sense of what the course involves. So really it's one of the high periods of modern art that we'll be looking at here. Many of the great names of modern art will be considered, and many of the movements of modern art, the isms of modern art, will be considered, like futurism, expressionism, surrealism, and some others, Dadaism, abstraction. These will all be things that will be considering movements or tendencies in modern art. So actually it's going to be a course where we move around quite a lot from country to country, but most of the countries we'll be looking at will be European countries. We'll start with the futurist artists, who are Italian artists. We'll start in Italy. Then we'll move on to look at abstract art, and I'll pick out a couple of figures to try and introduce abstract art through. I'll look at the Russian artist Kandinsky, and I'll look at the Dutch artist Mondrian, and look at their very different paths towards abstraction. Abstraction not being a unified phenomenon. There are different ways in which it began. Different artists found their own ways to it. The surrealist artists, the Dada artists, they come from a variety of different countries. When we talk about expressionist art, I'll be talking mostly about German and Austrian art. To some extent that was an international phenomenon as well. When people first started using the word expressionism about modern art, it was a general term for modernism as a whole, and indeed a lot of modern art has an expressionistic quality, but we will look at German expressionism particularly. So moving from country to country, mostly within Europe, and as I usually do with my modern art courses, I'll use China as the non-European example, because I think at this point in time in art history we really should be trying to take a more international approach to things. Maybe there just isn't time to look at every culture's contribution, but actually every culture was going through an experience of modernity and had some kind of artistic response to that experience. So we'll just take one to disrupt the Western-centeredness of the art historical perspective. Of course, elsewhere in our syllabus there are ways in which you can study the art of Asian modernity in more depth, so that's not really my goal here. This is the second of a sequence of 3 courses that look at different chronological periods of the modern movement in art. Each course is completely independent. You don't need to have taken the previous one, and you don't need to take the one that comes after this. It's the middle of the 3. Each is complete in its own terms, but I'll just say a little bit about the other 2 courses to give you an overview. The one we did last semester was called Vision in Crisis, and that looked at art in the very late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, roughly from about 1880 to, let's say, 1914, the date of the outbreak of the First World War. That's broadly our focus there. We did look at some things a bit earlier and some things a bit later. And we looked in that course actually at only a very small number of artists. We looked at Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, Matisse, Picasso. Again, we looked at Chinese artists, a non-Western example. And Seurat as well we looked at. So in this course we'll look at quite a lot more artists. That course was focused really on how artists begin to develop the language of modern art and begin to discover a sense of relativity about how to represent the world, that there are more than one ways of representing the world. We're looking at a time period where artists started to question some of the fundamental understandings about art that had been there in Western culture really from the time of the Renaissance. The great achievements of the Renaissance was the development of visual techniques for realistic representation. Paramount amongst those, of course, was perspective, the ability to represent space in a coherent and detailed way. But by the end of the 19th century, artists started to reject that paradigm, moving away from realism or dethroning realism. Somehow realism is still there, but it's there just as one possible way of working. It's not the only way of representing the world. And artists became much more concerned with art for its own sake, art for art's sake. They became concerned with the medium itself, forms and colours, lines, these things in their own right. 5 different ones to pick up. Can you leave the door just slightly open so people will feel welcome to come in, but not so open that this noise comes in? So really it's the beginning of a kind of language of modern art that we'll see the artists in this course also using. So you may, if you haven't studied modern art before, you may want to look at some of the artists of that time period to get a sense of what happened. You know, we are historians after all. We often look at what happened before to see how that influenced what happened in the time that we are concerned with. So that would be worthwhile doing if you don't have that kind of background. The course that comes after this one, towards the global, looks really at art after the Second World War. So art from the time of the, in the second half of the 20th century up till now, basically, looks at the major art movements at that time, when art becomes much more, over time, a globalized phenomenon. Nowadays, the art world is incredibly globalized, and Hong Kong, luckily for us. Hi. So
Hi.
Can you take 5?
Okay.
5, one of each.
Okay.
Luckily for us, Hong Kong happens to be one of the hubs of that global art network, with the Art Basel has 3 locations, one of which is in Hong Kong. The auction art market has Hong Kong as one of the top 3 locations. So we're well in touch with everything that's going on here. And one advantage that gives us actually in relation to this course is that you will have opportunities to see works by major European artists, even from the time period that we're studying here. If you go to the auction previews, you don't have to have enough money to buy those artworks. The auctions are open to all. It's like a kind of temporary museum at Lands in the convention and exhibition centre in Wan Chai, the extension part usually, but not always. So watch out for that, especially the Sotheby's and Christie's auctions, but there are others. And often they bring works of Western art that are going to be sold in London and New York to show them in Hong Kong as well, for the sake of Hong Kong buyers. Although the actual auctions taking place here in Hong Kong tend to be of Asian art, Chinese and other Asian art. But it's a great opportunity, and there are many commercial art galleries that show art from all around the world in Hong Kong. That tends, for the most part, to be more contemporary art of the last few decades, and this is all very interesting. Less often do we get art from the time period of this course, but I think it's really, really different from how things were when I first started teaching modern art in Hong Kong, where it was really a phenomenon that very few people had the chance to see. And at that time, less of the students could afford to travel as well, so there was less chance to go to see these works in their original habitats. And there were less international students coming from places where they had the chance to see these things before they even came to Hong Kong. So anyway, that's an important thing to remember, to make use of every opportunity you have to see actual works of art. You learn so much more when you see an actual work of art itself. There are many things that reproductions in books, or even worse in a way, projected images on a screen, won't tell you. Often the images you're seeing projected on the screen, sometimes they're made from the original artworks themselves. We're lucky that we do have an image collection that was built up in that way, but not always. Sometimes they're just taken from an image in a book, and because that's maybe the only one that's available. A printed image is made of printer's inks. It's not made of the original paint materials, pigments that the artists use. So it's already one step away. The representation of color will not be perfect. Even in printer's ink, you try to reproduce a painting in printer's ink, and you'll find that the colors will change somewhat. And you try and project an image, you'll find it will change even further. Images that you see on your own computer screen may look reasonably good, but then you project it, you'll find that they'll change. So we inevitably have to deal with reproductions. Art history as a discipline didn't come into existence till photographic reproduction became possible. It's a child itself of the modern world in that sense. But we should be wary of the limits of reproductions, how we can't rely on them, and use opportunities to study from the original. Apart from anything else, it's whenever you find such an opportunity. Apart from anything else, it'll just be more aesthetically enjoyable. Particularly when you look at something a little bit more difficult, like abstract art. It's sometimes rather hard to get a sense of it from reproduction. A tiny reproduction of a few, 2 inches by 2 inches reproduction in a book. How much are you going to get of a sense of a painting that could be, 10 feet across or something like that? Texture will be lost in reproduction, certain things like that, not just colour. So look out for those opportunities, and I'm saying that there are more of them now than there ever used to be in Hong Kong. So you're actually in a good place to look at art. And actually, even if you're looking at art that is not the art that we are studying on this course, still it trains your eye. I'm more interested in the transferable skills. What can you take away from your study that actually is going to be of use in the rest of your life? I'll say more about that later, but the whole structure of the course is designed about trying to emphasize those more lasting skills. So just developing the skill of looking at art, analyzing art critically, engaging with art in general is the skill I want you to develop above all others, and you can learn that in any situation where you have art to look at. And you probably find you have a deeper aesthetic appreciation, probably more ideas coming up, more thoughts coming up than when you're just looking at images in a book. And so I think if you do visit a gallery, take a notebook or something, or the digital equivalent, make notes of your responses to help train your eye. The focus in this course, thematically, I talked about the focus in terms of time period. Basically, it's going to be between the two world wars, from, say, 1914-18, that period of that war, to 1939-45, the period of the Second World War. I'll go a bit outside that, those time limits where it seems useful to do so, but roughly the sequence of 3 courses are broken down chronologically. They're also broken down in terms of approach. There's a slightly different kind of concern in each course. So the first course, in the sequence, the Vision in Crisis, is more about, as the title says, a kind of crisis in vision. Art is losing faith in the Renaissance paradigm of art making and discovering that there are more different ways to make art, more different ways to understand the world, to represent the world visually. In this course, we're not so much concerned directly about the art language itself, although that question will come up enough. It'll still be there. But our big focus is on art's relationship to society, modernity and its discontents, the whole experience of modernity, and how do artists respond to that. So you could say there's a question about art's relationship to life. What does it have to say about life? How does it respond to life? Not looking at art as a self-contained experience, the way, say, philosophers in the Kantian tradition tend to look at art as purely about aesthetic things, completely separate from the domain of truth or the domain of morality. But maybe we don't think in such a compartmentalized way. Artists often have things they want to say about the world in which they're living. Art is not just about itself, it's about other things. Although in the modern world, art is also about itself. It's self-conscious in what it does. So what do we mean by modernity? Well, I'm just using the term in a very loose sense. You could basically say art of the advanced capitalist societies. You could use the word capitalism to describe it. So all that modernity to me just means that the development of industry following the Industrial Revolution, the process of urbanization that went on after that. We're still in such a process of urbanization. It's only in the last 10 years or so that we've seen a shift to where there's more than half of the world's population living in cities. Now it's the predominant experience of life to be living in a city. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, we see a lot of that process of the growth of great cities. And art is often very much a city phenomenon. That's true even if you go back to the Renaissance. The great drivers of culture were cities like Florence, Rome, Venice. They were, it wasn't out in the countryside somewhere that artists were coming up with new ideas, for the most part. So responding to industrialization, urbanization, the development of new social classes, the rise of the bourgeoisie is a phenomenon of the 19th century, and the concomitant with that is the rise of a working class. The working class was created by industrial capitalism. It didn't pre-exist it. So art, who is art going to talk to? And if you go back to the 18th century, a lot of the art is addressed to aristocratic patrons. It's there to decorate palaces and so forth. By the 19th century, you're starting to see art reflecting much more openly bourgeois views of the world. It's to be bought to go in a middle-class drawing room. Maybe that's why Impressionist paintings are smaller. They're not to go on the wall or even the ceiling of a palace. They're to go over the fireplace in a bourgeois home. So there's that question of new audiences, new patrons as well. All of these things are changing, and art is going to change as a result of that. So what do artists have to say about this modern world? It's a very rapidly changing world. You know, we even know even within your lifetime things have changed really fast, let alone within my lifetime. I mean, I can remember when Hong Kong University had one fax machine. You know, you had to go up to the registry if you wanted to send a fax. Now, fax machines have been dead for so long, it's probably not even being a significant part of your life, right? You know, you communicate through more digital means and so forth. Handheld devices, laptop devices and so forth. So, you know, whole kind of eras of communication technology succeed each other very fast. But this is to some extent happening more broadly in the whole modern period of or industrial capitalist period. As Karl Marx put it in one phrase, he says, all that is solid melts into air. You know, this is the static world of feudal society disappeared, where things remain broadly the same for long periods of time. That's not the way things are in our lives nowadays, and it hasn't really been through the whole modern period. So lack of foundations, nothing that you can just rely on is going to stay the same. It doesn't anymore. You know, in the old days, people will just study, you know, they just do the job their father did, and they do it for their whole life and all that sort of thing. Nowadays, it's very strange to do something, you know, for the whole of your life. You know, I'm an unusual person that I've been teaching all my life, and I always wanted to be a teacher. It's not the way things are going, and especially in your life, maybe teaching will be one of the few things that hasn't changed so much. You know, someone standing up and talking to a bunch of other people, that's what teaching was like in the Middle Ages, but actually most jobs have totally transformed and become, you know, disappeared in many cases. Actually, that's why I think what you're doing is very smart, because you're studying in a humanities and arts environment, which is a kind of training which will give you the skills to respond yourselves to an ever-changing environment. It'll give you very flexible, transferable skills. And you could move from, you know, your skills are not job dependent. You know, it's not like training to be an accountant or something where you have one specific skill set and then later you find some robot's going to be doing your job. You know, but if you have a humanities training, okay, maybe a robot will take your job once or twice, but you can move on and find other things to do with your life. And even if you don't have a job, of course, looking at art would be fine. You could just wander around the museums and so forth and live a fulfilled life. So, yeah, we're all inside this phenomenon, I suppose the point I'm trying to say. We're inside it, and so were the artists. You know, in many ways, although we're studying a time period which is not our time period, in many ways the world we're living in is very much part of the same world. We're still living in capitalist societies. You know, even in nominally communist societies, they're living in a capitalist world, in capitalist global economy, China is a capitalist society, even if it's nominally a communist society. In practice, the logic of capitalism determines things. So some artists responded to these changes of modernity in a very positive way, or they saw those changes as being very positive. They were happy that the past was disappearing. Anti-traditionalists, especially at the earlier part of the century, where some of the terrible things that were going to happen that were specific to the modern era, mechanized warfare, mechanized genocide, factory-style genocide, all these kind of modern horrors had yet to happen. The invention of atom bombs and the possibility of human beings just annihilating themselves entirely from the surface of the world. All these kind of modern threats had yet to really emerge, and one can imagine it was more possible to feel a sense of a promise with the modern world, even a kind of utopian feeling about it. And probably the first artists we'll look at will be those kind of artists. We'll look at the Italian futurist artists who really, for the most part, their art is a celebration of modernity. They're seeing it as a good thing. Italy was a country where there was so much of the weight of the past. There's a song by Bob Dylan, one line is, "The streets of Rome are paved with rubble, ancient footprints are everywhere." And yeah, if you go to Rome, you do have a sense of a 2,000-year-old past very, very, very present around in all the ruins of ancient Roman civilization. Of course, there are plenty of other ancient civilizations around. China is one, but you don't feel the weight of the past in the same way. China's past is there in its, written texts and things like that, not so much in physical structures that are dating back 2,000 years that are intruding into the fabric of modern city life. That's actually experience many foreign tourists have when they go to China. They've read about all the great things of Chinese civilization, and when they get there, they say, "Well, where is it? Where is all the old stuff? We can't see anything that hasn't been built in the last 10 years." So Italy, perhaps for that reason, becomes a place where people want to turn away from the past. They want to see what is particularly possible in the modern world. And it's good in a sense to have some optimism about what the future can bring, not to be completely pessimistic to it. But a lot of the artists we'll be looking at will be less optimistic and less celebratory of modernity than the Italian futurists. They'll see modernity as having within it certain kind of problems, Going back to someone I mentioned before, Karl Marx, of course, he presented modern life as having a certain kind of problem that will develop, the clash between two classes. The rise of the middle class, the capitalist bourgeoisie, will create its own nemesis in the working class that eventually will come to replace it, according to his theory. Some people did diagnose the problems of modernity in those kind of political terms or class terms even. The 20th century is an era of revolutionary change in many places. We saw that, of course, the notion of revolution goes back. The French Revolution is a late 18th century phenomenon even. But many of the revolutions that we know of are 20th century ones. Most famously, the Russian Revolution, the first socialist revolution, so following on the logic of Marx, class conflict. Although the reality is it's a destruction more of a feudal system really than of a kind of so much an advanced bourgeois economy. Then, of course, there were revolutions in China, in 1911 to 1912, and then again 1949. So within the time period, we're looking at a couple of revolutions, really. The whole foundation of society changing all the time, sometimes very radically. This is the modern experience. Some artists, rather than having positive social visions based on a critique of modern life, other artists perhaps are more trying to escape from modernity in some way. And sometimes that escape will take the form of a sort of spiritual retreat from modern life, from materialist existence altogether. A lot of the artists that were involved with development of abstraction are such artists. The abstract art, not always, but very often, is tied in with some kind of spiritual worldview. Kandinsky, one of the great pioneers of abstraction, wrote a book called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. His idea was that modern life is pretty materialistic, and art needs to try and serve the purpose of leading people away from the materialism of modern life. And abstraction was the way, because if you get rid of objects in your art, then you can help people to become less disengaged with the world of material things. You need to move somehow beyond that world to open up a new spiritual horizon. So a very different kind of, it's not religious art in the sense that so much art of the Renaissance or the Baroque is religious art. It doesn't tie back very much to that, but it is art that has a kind of spiritual sense. So a lot of artists are falling into that approach. Even some of the expressionist artists who don't go as far as abstraction are trying to throw off what they see as the over-civilized quality of modern life, over-sophisticated quality, trying to get back in touch with the body, or getting back in touch with the emotions that have become suppressed in modern urban existence. So this is all part of the phenomenon that we'll see. We're seeing a variety of different responses to modern life in this period. Surrealists, they are also very self-consciously critical of modern life, and they feel, rather than trying to change the world outside them, according to some political logic, say, you've got to start by changing your own inner psyche. You've got to deprogram your own psyche. So the way to do that is to go towards the unconscious, where that which has been repressed in everyday life is going to come out, and bring that out into their art so it can liberate other people as well. So art as a tool to do stuff in the world, not just a self-contained thing. As art not as a mirror of the world, faithfully representing it. We don't really, in the modern world, believe in faithful mirrors in art anymore. Art more like a hammer to change the world, something that you can, it's useful still, art. It does stuff. So let's talk, I'll come back to talk about the art itself when we look at some images, but let me say some things about the structure of the course and about the assessment. There'll be three main assessments: a long essay, a tutorial presentation, and a slide test. I'm mentioning them in the order of their importance or their weight. The long essay is 50% of the total grade, so that's really important. You may write essays for other courses, but don't necessarily treat them as equivalent as the essay for this course in terms of the amount of time you spend on them, if they only represent a much smaller part of the total grading. Bear that in mind when you're allocating your time between different tasks. You have lots of things to do, I know. The tutorial presentation, that will be 20% of your total grade, as will the slide test. The order in which they're going to come at you is, the first thing you'll do will be your tutorial presentation. Then probably about the second to last week of the course, you'll have a slide test in class test. And then the long essay will be due around about the end of the semester or just after. I'll announce the exact date later when I know what my deadline is for marking. They haven't told me that yet. But actually, although that's the order in which they'll come at you, I would say I would start working on your long essay project immediately, really, for various reasons. One is because it's the biggest thing you'll do, and so you need to get started in it, started with it. Also because I think most people will find that they're less busy in the first half of the semester. There's more time available to you to get ahead with the groundwork for something. In the second half of the semester, especially as it goes on, you become more and more busy and pressed with different kind of deadlines and tests and so forth. So you'll find it harder to have focused time to work on things. So I really suggest to get started with that. The long essay, the topic is really open to you. I want you to come up with your own topic. There's no list of topics. This is a format I use in all my period courses. I think it's really important to give you the opportunity to find a way of following your own interests, getting on the thread of your own interests. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to get you inserted into some pre-existing thing that you have to, like a kind of a boot camp where you all have to learn to do things my way or something like that, or master a certain preset collection of facts or something like that. That's not the whole approach at all. It's all about you. It's a much more student-centered approach to teaching or education. I want you to develop your own interests, and having your own choice of topic will enable you to do that. Of course, that's more difficult than having an assigned topic, sure, but that difficulty is intrinsic to the task itself. It's not just some accidental difficulty. It's something you can learn from. That's part of the whole point of it. Learning how to deal with undefined situations. I've just been talking about how modernity is a kind of undefined situation where the foundations of things are shifting all the time. That's the kind of world we live in. So yeah, we want to become adept at finding ways of framing problems ourselves, deciding what the problem is, what the issue is, what is interesting here, what needs attention here. Let me be the one to define what that is, because in real life you don't get a list of topics to choose from. You get just the totality of life is presented to you, and you better find a way of, how you're going to do that. You're just going to do what everyone else does, just follow along in line, or you're going to have your own approach, with a humanities education, hopefully the latter. So, you're going to be more like a detective. You don't accept what you're told. You'll listen to what everyone has to say, but you'll come up with your own idea of what the hell is going on here. So how to come up with a topic? Even in science, that's a difficult question. Scientific method tells you what to do to test out a hypothesis. It doesn't really tell you how to have hypotheses in the first place. You know, it's just, it's kind of a difficult thing. We're talking about getting on the thread of your own creativity, but that's an important and wonderful thing to be doing. How to start? You start, I think, by reading around in a very general way. You start looking at the art of this period as a whole. Even if you studied it before, look at it again. Wherever your starting point is, take your level of overall knowledge of this period to a new level. Expose yourself to images, but also to writing about those images. Find out what some of the issues are. So I'm assuming the first thing you do is that you will go and look at general books about this period. For this course, there's no textbook or anything like that, because I'm not trying to get you to, to all absorb and then regurgitate a certain set view of things. I want you to use those kind of introductory books only at the first stage to get an overview. So the first stage of your study, you're looking at a lot of different things, you're flipping through things, you're reading a few pages here and there as your interest develops. You're trying to get a sense of the overall view, looking at a large-scale map of the whole territory, if you like. Not just things you already know. You're trying to surprise yourself with new things, because to just jump to write about something you already know about may be less interesting than discovering something new. That's one of the great things to do in your time of study, is to discover new things. Don't just trample down the same territory that you've already been walking in. Discover some new territory. That will be good. You will grow through that process. So once you've done that reading and looking at those images, I think ideas will come up to you. And then you start to want to read in more depth about a certain area. So what you'll do at that point is you'll do a bibliographic search. You'll find out what has already been said about this artist or this theme. And then you'll start going down in depth. You don't have enough time to read in depth about everything, but I don't want, rather than you just having superficial knowledge about a lot of different things, as can happen in a more teacher-centered course, I want you to go into depth about what is your particular thing. I mean, what the advantage of this sort of approach to study is that everyone can follow their own interests in depth, and then all forced into the same template. So there should be 5 different handouts.
Thank you. Sorry.
If you came in late, you didn't get all the handouts. There should be 5 different handouts. So everything I'm saying now about the long essay or about the assessment, all that is in the course handout. So I want you to have a look at that pretty early on. I would say have a look at it this week, definitely before the end of the add drop period, because I'm trying to say this is a slightly different course to some that you may have taken, maybe not necessarily to all, but it may be different to some you've taken. So I want you to know what kind of a course it is before you decide whether that's the right type of course for you. So if you find yourself having any kind of difficulty about isolating a topic, then please have a dialogue with me, send me an email or something, chat with me after class, and I can try and help you. And definitely I want you, by the reading week really, by the middle of the semester, to let me know what you're planning to work on. It's not so much that I want to approve everyone's topic, but I won't say no, you're not allowed to work on that. But what I will try to do sometimes is to help you frame the topic. Maybe I will know that the topic you're considering is too wide or something like that, or too difficult, there's not going to be enough material, maybe you need to reframe it slightly. So I would like you to talk with me about your topic. What you're really looking for is a research question, some issue that is worth looking into, where there are two sides at least to be considered, rather than something that is very clear cut. Something to investigate you're after. As regards the time period, because the essay is actually just between you and me, so really I could be a little bit flexible if you want to look at an artist from an earlier time period or a later time period. Ask me about that. It's important that it's something that really interests you. That's the thing, Don't rush too soon into deciding your topic. When you look at something in more detail, you may find a different angle, a different concern comes up. But don't leave it all till the second half of the semester and then try and write an essay in a very short period of time. That's unlikely to produce a good result. So this is what I mean when I say this course, you've got to be quite independent. You've got to set your own working pace, work under your own initiative, because that's an important skill to develop. You won't always have a teacher around to tell you what you should do next and all that. So I'm more interested in that kind of higher level skills that you can develop of working independently. That's what you need to do in real life. And writing doing an investigation on a topic that you have defined yourself, this is a kind of skill that's going to be really valuable in all sorts of different job situations or life situations, to be able to make a detailed, reliable, systematic, evidence-based report on a certain topic. That will stand you in good stead in all sorts of situations. You don't necessarily need to know what the title is going to be of your essay at an early stage. You don't know how you have to know how you're going to structure it. All that sort of thing will come later on. First, find out what you're going to find out, and then you can think about how you're going to structure it. So all the detail about the assessments are given in the course, about the course handout. There's also this essay writing handout, which has some further hints about essay writing. Any questions now about the long essay? Oh, one other thing I would say is you need to use the library. You can't just rely on online searches, let alone on everyday websites. You need to get into the scholarly literature, and the scholarly literature, some of it is available online. That's great. A lot of it is available online, but most of what's available online that's scholarly would be in the form of articles, and you may not find articles on themes that you want. For books, some books are available online, but a lot are not. You're going to have to go to the library for those. So research doesn't mean Googling. Is I suppose what I'm saying. Any questions about the long essay? The tutorial, that's a much smaller size project in scale. Good, because it's going to come at you more quickly. This will probably be, this is what we're using the tutorials for in this course. We use it to make individual presentations on topics, not for responding to readings. There are no set readings. It's up to you to decide what readings you want to follow. There's a bibliography here, but this bibliography is just to get you started. Once you're doing work on your individual topic, you'll need to use the whole library catalogue and all the different databases that are within it as well as your way of finding information. This is just like a starting point, like a trampoline to get you bouncing into the literature from. There's also a few books on a shelf in the Fine Arts Resources room that are introductory texts for you to get started with. Your tutorial presentation, probably I'll tell you exactly when we know how many people are in the group, how long it will be, but probably only about 8 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Each person in turn will give their presentation, and then they'll have to sort of defend what they've been saying in response to questions. Again, I think you should start right now with that, because you may be one of the first to present. I think the presentations, I don't know exactly, again, the number of tutorial meetings and the number of tutorial groups, it depends partly on how many people enroll for the course. So I can't tell you exactly then, but probably I would imagine it will start in the 4th week of the semester. There's also the question of Chinese New Year maybe getting in the way, something like that, but we'll see. I'll have to define that later when I know who's actually on the course at the end of the ad drop period. The topic, since the topic would be much narrower for your tutorial presentation than for your long essay, of course, because you just have a few minutes to present it. I suggest you just talk about one work of art. That doesn't mean you can only show one image. Probably what you'll do is present a PowerPoint. That's what people usually do. You may have, say, 8 images in your PowerPoint, but you're talking about one image. The other images may be a comparison images, something like that. It's important not to try and take on too much in your tutorial presentation, otherwise you won't have time to go in depth about it. One artwork, I think, would be a simple way to limit what you're trying to do. Imagine if you show eight PowerPoint slides. If you had only 8 minutes to talk about it, that means you only have 1 minute to talk about each slide. So how much can you say? So you could actually make a good presentation with just showing one image, and that's that. You don't even need any more than that. So economy is an important consideration when it comes to your presentation. How to get your ideas across, how to condense them in a good way. Don't spend too much time on background and introduction. Generally, the best strategy would be to launch straight into what you want to say. Say your main thing right at the beginning. That's how a great speech starts, for instance, or a great piece of music. Da 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 da. Just start straight in. Don't have. Well, first I'll give you the background and tell you. The artist was born on, they went to school. No, da 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 da. Just get straight in there. And what is it you're going to say? That's the moment when your audience is most interested and they're fresh and want to hear what you have to say. Don't waste that by saying the things that are not the important things. And if you say it at the beginning, you can be sure you're going to get it across. In classical rhetoric, the art of speaking, there's a notion of the exordium. You've got to attract people's attention at the beginning. Tell them what's the issue here. Why is this of interest? Then gradually you're building the evidence for what you're going to say. Think of it as a kind of argument. So the two main tasks are to present something in written form, to present something in verbal form. Those are both great skills. You'll find in all kinds of jobs. You'll be asked to make a short presentation on this topic that you're the one who's got to investigate. Well, get your ideas across quickly. Maybe you've got to persuade your team members. Think of it as a task of persuasion. Persuasion requires evidence and clarity. All of these things are hard to do, but hey, you're students, you're trying to learn how to do things. You're not supposed to know already how to do all these things. You're supposed to be learning and honing your skills by doing it. But the amazing thing is, Hong Kong U students seem to be particularly good at verbal presentations, even if they've never done one before. Often they come up with very, very strong verbal presentations. Any questions about that? Anything I didn't explain very well? It's all in the handout as well, about the course handout. The thing I want you to least worry about at this point is the class test, because that's not going to come till like week 10 or 11 of the course. And it's more about how to show that you have developed skills of looking at and analysing visual images. So everything you do in the whole of your study of the course will prepare you for that. One thing I think you can do to prepare for it would be to each week consolidate your lecture notes. Go over your lecture notes and see what, are there any sort of gaps to you? And then consolidate that by reading a bit further about what we've covered in class. Again, I'm not going to give you any set reading. I want you to develop the thread of your own intellectual inquiry. So I want you to find your own things to read, but everything based on your own interests. So that will take you a bit further and deepen your knowledge about what we've covered in class. And then when it comes to the test, you'll be able to bring that information which you have and other students may not have the same thing, bring that all to bear. So generally developing your skills of looking at works of art, not just memory skills of learning facts about things that you studied in this course, because most of the artwork you'll see in the rest of your life will be artwork that you didn't see in the classroom. Occasionally you say, oh, finally I'm getting to see the Mona Lisa, all right. But most of the time you'll be saying, wow, never saw this before, what is it? So you're dealing with that situation of not knowing what the hell this is, but you should have a bag of tricks, a bag of skills that you can bring to bear, and you say, well, let me see what I can make of this. So when I had exams where I had to respond to images like you will in your class test, they could have been of anything. There were no sort of set images. Different people taking the same exam may have been in different classes, but still you're expected to come up with something. So don't think of that as just a memory test. And don't think of the lectures as something that you have to memorize. The lectures are not the course. The lectures are just one thing, and perhaps not, and really not the most important thing. They're just a starting point for your study. The most important things that you're doing in this course will be, I say this, for all of my courses really, is the reading you do, the thinking about the reading you do, the looking at art you do, the thinking about the looking that you do, and the research and writing and verbal presentations that you do. That's the core of what you're doing, the most valuable thing. And the teacher's role in that is more just as a catalyst, or at best a catalyst, or maybe just like a sort of cheerleader, just standing by the side, waving pom-poms or something while you are busy achieving wonderful things. The lectures are the starting point, and don't try and memorize them all. It's a lecture. If the lecture is water, it's a swimming pool rather than a glass. You don't have to drink it all. You'll feel unwell if you try and drink it all. to take from the lectures what is useful to you. You know, sometimes it's not useful to make very, very detailed notes. Sometimes it's better just to pay attention, to look at what's on the screen, you know, not to worry all the time about, about getting everything down. I'm just one possible source of information. It's a convenient thing to have someone standing up and introducing all the different artists to you, but when you pick up a book, you pick up a book by someone who may have spent their whole life thinking about that one artist or that one issue, and they will know a lot more than I will ever know about that topic. So, you know, many different sources will be useful, and your teacher's voice is just one possible source of information. So, really important thing for you to do is to give me back the information about your tutorial availability. I'd like to get that back today before you leave. I need to know which groups you can make, and please don't just put your favorite time slot down, because you may not be able to get it. You know, I will try to put you in your favorite time slot, but you need to tell me all the ones that you're available. Otherwise, it may be difficult. Last semester it was really difficult to find a way to fit everyone into tutorial groups. It looks like this will be a slightly smaller class, so that might make life a bit easier. But if you are only available for one slot, or you're not available for any slots, then I want you to put down all the different time slots in the week where you're free, because I might have to come up with another group to try and fit you together, and then I'll need to know who's in the same group. So please keep free all the availabilities that you've indicated until I give you the tutorial groupings breakdown. I can't do that till the end of the add drop period, because I don't know who's in the course till then. So bear with me about that, but I'd like to get your availability back from you today. So what can you can keep the first sheet, because that has some useful information for you, and then just give me back the second sheet before you leave today. One thing I should have said, you know, you can use your tutorial presentation to start to develop and get some feedbacks on things that you're going to do, cover in your long essay. The two could be connected. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. They don't have to be, but they could be. But the tutorial presentation, the topic is going to be much narrower than the topic of an essay, I think. You can't present in 8 minutes or 10 minutes the whole of an essay idea. So anything that is not clear to you about what I said, or anything you want to ask me about? As I say, about the course handout should give you anything, the more sort of the details about the assessment and everything. Everyone's happy? Good. So maybe we just have a quick 5 minutes break, and then I'll start showing you some images.